The email from HR was waiting in my inbox before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, and the subject line made my stomach drop. Confirmation of resignation effective immediately. My name is Natalie Mercer. I've worked in corporate risk compliance for 11 years, and I have never resigned from a position without a signed letter, a transition plan, and at least 2 awkward meetings. So when I read that I had submitted an official voluntary resignation request through the employee self-service portal, I knew immediately something was wrong. The message was brief. It stated that my resignation had been received the previous afternoon at 3:42 p.m., processed by HR, and acknowledged by my department head. My final working day was listed as today. My system access would be deactivated by 5 p.m. Benefits termination details were attached. I didn't submit anything at 3:42 p.m. The day before, at exactly that time, I was in a quarterly audit review call with 4 other managers and an external consultant. I could prove it. I reread the email 3 times before forwarding it to myself at my personal address. Then I checked the sender. It was legitimate, HR Operations internal domain digitally signed. No phishing indicators, no tipos, no formatting errors. This wasn't a prank. It was processed. I stood up from my kitchen table, walked to my laptop bag and opened my work computer. My access still worked. I logged into the employee self-service portal. There it was. Under employment status changes, a record dated yesterday at 15 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds. Request type: voluntary resignation. Notice period: immediate. Reason selected: personal. There was even a confirmation checkbox indicating that I understood I was forfeiting my annual bonus eligibility. The portal showed the request originated from my employee ID and was submitted from an internal IP address. I took screenshots of everything. Then I checked my sent email folder. Nothing. No resignation letter draft. No attachments. I checked the portal's document upload history. A PDF was attached to the resignation request. I opened it. It was a 1-page letter formatted exactly like the standard template HR provides when someone resigns. My name, my job title, a sentence thanking the company for the opportunity, a statement that I was resigning effective immediately due to personal reasons. At the bottom was a digital signature. My name typed in the e-signature field. I don't use the phrase personal reasons. I write formally. I would have referenced transition support. I would never resign without notice unless I had another offer secured. I did not. The metadata showed the document had been uploaded through the portal interface, not emailed. I closed the laptop for a moment and sat still. At 8:17 a.m. I called HR. Human Resources, this is Carla. A woman answered in a neutral tone. This is Natalie Mercer from Risk Compliance, I said. I just received confirmation of a resignation I did not submit. There was a short pause. I heard keyboard typing. Yes, Natalie, she replied carefully. Your voluntary resignation was processed yesterday afternoon. Is there a question regarding your final compensation? Yes, I said evenly. The question is why you processed a resignation I did not submit. Silence. Then more typing. I'm seeing the submission in the portal, she said. It was entered under your credentials. It appears complete and properly authenticated. I did not enter it, I said. At 3:42 p.m. yesterday, I was in a recorded meeting. You can verify that. She didn't argue. She just said, I'm going to escalate this to our HR systems team. Can you come in this morning? I'm already on my way, I replied. I live 30 minutes from the office. I didn't change out of the sweater I'd been wearing at my kitchen table. I drove straight there, mentally reconstructing the prior day minute by minute. At 3:42 p.m., I was presenting risk exposure metrics related to vendor onboarding. I had shared my screen. The meeting was recorded automatically by IT policy, for colleagues could confirm my presence. I had not stepped away. If the portal recorded an internal IP address, that meant the request came from within the company network. When I arrived, my badge still worked at the security gate. The receptionist looked at me with mild confusion. Oh, she said. I thought you. I know, I replied. Where is Carla? Carla met me in a small conference room on the 3rd floor. She had printed the resignation request and placed it in a folder. I want to be very clear, I began before she could speak. I did not submit this. She nodded once. We're not assuming intent, she said. But the system shows multi-factor authentication was used. How? I asked. She turned her laptop toward me. The portal log displayed the sequence. 15:41 und 52 Sekunden User Login. Nerse 01. 15 hours 42 minutes and 3 seconds. Multi-factor authentication approved. 15 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds. Resignation form submitted. 15 hours 42 minutes and 22 seconds. Confirmation email generated. The multi-factor method listed was push notification to registered mobile device. My phone. I pulled it out and opened my authentication app history. There were several entries from yesterday. One at 9:03 a.m. for email login. One at 12:15 p.m. for expense submission. At 3:42 p.m. there was an approved push request. I stared at it. I remember the moment. During the audit call my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, saw a push notification from the company authentication app, and approved it automatically. I assumed it was for the shared drive access I'd attempted earlier in the meeting. I approve these prompts dozens of times a week. Takes half a second. You approved it, Carla said gently. I approved a push notification, I replied. I did not submit a resignation. She nodded. Which means someone initiated the login and form submission from within the network and relied on your approval. I leaned back in the chair. So someone logged into my account on-site and waited for me to authorize access. That's what the timestamps suggest. From where? I asked. She hesitated. IT is pulling workstation data. 10 minutes later, a systems analyst named Victor joined us. He brought a tablet and a printed log. The login originated from workstation 3B17, he said. 3rd floor East Wing. My office is 3rd floor West Wing. Who sits at 3B17? I asked. Victor checked his sheet. That's assigned to shared services, primarily used by HR coordinators for document processing. Carla's posture shifted slightly. So the resignation was submitted from an HR workstation? I asked. Victor nodded. Correct. Carla spoke carefully. We have open desk policies. Multiple people may use that station. Then we review badge access and camera footage, I said. Because I did not walk to East Wing at 3:42. Victor nodded. Security is already notified. I watched Carla closely. She did not look defensive. She looked concerned. Why would someone do this? She asked almost to herself. I didn't answer immediately. 3 weeks earlier, I had submitted an internal report regarding procedural inconsistencies in bonus allocation within shared services. The discrepancies involved approval timestamps and performance metrics that didn't align with policy. I hadn't accused anyone directly. I documented anomalies and forwarded them to internal audit. The shared services team reports operationally to HR. I'd like a copy of the resignation PDF with full metadata, I said. Victor nodded. We can provide that. And I want the CCTV footage from East Wing between 3:30 and 3:50 p.m. yesterday. Carla looked at me. Natalie, this is serious. Yes, I replied. It is. By 10:15 a.m. my department head, Gregory Shaw, was informed. He called me into his office. I was surprised by your resignation, he said without preamble. I didn't resign. He studied my face for a moment. HR confirmed there's an investigation. Yes. He leaned back. You understand how this looks. I do, I said. Which is why I'm not leaving this building without documented correction. He nodded slowly. You have strong performance reviews. No disciplinary issues. No prior notice of dissatisfaction. Correct. And you were in a meeting at 3:42? Yes. Recorded. He opened his calendar. I was on that call. Yes. He stared at the screen, then back at me. All right, he said. Until this is resolved, you remain in role. I'll send a written confirmation that your employment status is under review pending investigation. Thank you. As I stood to leave, he added, Natalie, if this ties back to the shared services audit memo. It might, I said. He didn't finish the sentence. At 11:30 a.m., Security called Carla to confirm they had isolated footage from workstation 3B17. We reconvened in a smaller room with a wall-mounted monitor. Security manager Daniel Cho connected a laptop and pulled up the video feed. Timestamp: 15:38. The East Wing corridor camera showed light foot traffic. At 15 hours 39 minutes and 12 seconds, a woman approached 3B17. She wore a navy cardigan and carried a folder. Carla inhaled sharply. It was Melissa Trent, Senior HR Operations Coordinator. Melissa had been the point of contact when I requested documentation for bonus allocation procedures. The footage showed Melissa sitting at the workstation. She logged in. At 15 hours 41 minutes and 50 seconds, she glanced down at her phone. My phone buzzed at 15:42. On the video, Melissa looked at the screen, typed for roughly 20 seconds, then clicked several times. At 15 hours 42 minutes and 23 seconds, she printed a single page. She placed it in her folder and walked away. No one else touched the workstation during that window. The room was silent. Daniel paused the video. We have clear visual of her at the station during login and submission timestamps. Carla's voice was tight. That's our internal HR terminal. I kept my hands folded on the table. What was printed? Victor checked his log. A resignation acknowledgement form. It auto-generates after submission. So she submitted my resignation and printed confirmation, I said. Carla closed her eyes briefly. I need to speak with Melissa. Before you do, I said calmly, I want confirmation in writing that my resignation is void, and that this is being treated as unauthorized access and identity misuse. Carla nodded immediately. You'll have that within the hour. Melissa was called into a separate room. I was not invited to that meeting, but I didn't need to be. The footage was unambiguous. At 1:05 p.m., Carla returned to me. Melissa claims it was an error, she said. An error? I repeated. She says she accessed the wrong employee file while processing another resignation and initiated the workflow accidentally. And relied on me to approve the login? I asked. Carla hesitated. She said she thought the system was already authenticated. That's not how the portal works, I replied. It requires fresh multi-factor for status changes. Carla nodded slowly. IT confirms that. Did she explain why she printed the confirmation? She says she was going to correct it. Before or after my access was terminated at 5 p.m.? I asked. Carla didn't answer immediately. I stood up. This is not a clerical error, I said evenly. She logged into my profile intentionally. She initiated a resignation workflow. She waited for authentication approval. She printed confirmation. And she did it 3 weeks after I submitted an audit memo concerning her department. Carla looked at me directly. Natalie, we are suspending her pending formal investigation. Good, I said. Because if this isn't handled properly, I will escalate externally. To whom? She asked quietly. To corporate compliance oversight and, if necessary, law enforcement. Submitting a false resignation through authenticated systems is identity misuse and potentially fraudulent termination. She nodded once. Understood. At 2:30 p.m., I received an official email from HR Legal. Your previously processed resignation has been voided. Your employment remains active. An internal investigation has been initiated regarding unauthorized system access. I saved it in 3 places. At 4:15 p.m., IT sent a report confirming the multi-factor push originated from workstation 3B17 session ID, and that the resignation workflow required deliberate navigation through 3 confirmation screens. Not 1 click. 3. At 5:02 p.m., I received a text message from an unknown number. You should have just left quietly. I stared at it for a long moment before taking a screenshot. Then I forwarded it to Carla and copied legal. The day I took a single day off work, HR said I had resigned through an official request. By the end of that same day, it was clear someone had tried to remove me from my job using the company's own systems. And the person who initiated it had access, motive, and proximity. This was no longer about a mistaken click. It was about who believed they could erase my employment record with a 20-second window and a push notification. The next morning, my building access card failed at the turnstile. It didn't flash red immediately. It gave a half-second pause, as if the system was deciding what to do with me, then denied entry. Security Officer Patel stepped out of the booth. "Ms. Mercer," he said carefully, "I was told your status was reinstated." "It was," I replied, holding up my phone with the HR legal email visible. He checked his screen. "Your badge is still coded as inactive, separation pending." I took a slow breath. Who controls badge reactivation? Facilities updates it after HR clears the termination flag, he said. "Call facilities," I said. He made the call. I stood there while two employees swiped past me into the lobby. It is a specific kind of humiliation to be physically blocked from your own workplace while your name is technically on the payroll. Facilities answered. There was confusion on their end. The termination code had been triggered automatically when the resignation workflow was processed. Although HR voided the resignation, the downstream systems had not been fully reversed. "How long to fix it?" I asked. 30 minutes, Patel relayed. "I'll wait," I said. While standing there, I opened my benefits portal on my phone. My health coverage status showed termination effective end of month. My 401k portal showed separation distribution options available. My company email, however, was still accessible. The resignation hadn't just been symbolic. It had initiated a cascade. At 8:52 a.m., my badge activated again. I walked directly to IT before going to my desk. Victor met me with a printed incident summary. "We pulled additional logs overnight," he said. "Show me," I replied. He pointed to a line I hadn't seen before. At 15 hours 40 minutes and 11 seconds, 2 minutes before the resignation submission, there was a profile access query for my performance review file. "Who accessed that?" I asked. "Same workstation. Same session," Victor said. "So she reviewed my performance file before submitting the resignation." "Yes." "Was anything downloaded?" "No downloads recorded. But she viewed the summary tab." I knew what was in that summary. My audit memo was referenced under current strategic initiatives. "She knew exactly whose profile she was in," I said. Victor nodded. I asked for one more thing. "Has anyone accessed my personnel file since HR voided the resignation?" He checked. 2 accesses yesterday evening. HR legal and director of people operations. "That's appropriate," I said. Then I hesitated. "Any access from Melissa's credentials after suspension?" Victor shook his head. "Her system access was locked at 3:12 p.m. yesterday." "Good." At 9:30 a.m., I received a calendar invite from HR Legal for a formal statement session at 11 a.m. The meeting took place in a conference room on the 5th floor. Present were Carla, an attorney named Daniel Ruiz from corporate counsel, and a note-taker. Daniel began without small talk. "Ms. Mercer, we are treating this as potential intentional misuse of company systems. We need a detailed chronology from your perspective." I gave it to them. I described the audit memo I submitted 3 weeks prior. It documented discrepancies in bonus approvals within shared services. Specifically, adjustments made after performance review deadlines that favored certain coordinators. "Was Melissa Trent one of the coordinators affected by the memo?" Daniel asked. "Yes," I said. "Her team's metrics were cited." "Did you notify her before submitting the memo?" "I requested documentation from her. I did not inform her I was escalating concerns." Daniel nodded. "Understood." Carla asked, "Have you had any direct conflict with her?" "No verbal conflict," I replied. But she was noticeably curt after I requested the documentation. Daniel then asked about the text message. I showed him the screenshot. The number was local but unrecognized. "We'll preserve this," he said. "Do not respond." "I wasn't planning to," I said. He leaned forward slightly. "Natalie, I need to ask directly. Have you shared your authentication credentials with anyone?" "No." "Has anyone had physical access to your phone?" "No." He nodded. "Then the multi-factor approval likely relied on you habitually approving prompts without verifying the source." "Yes," I said plainly. "That's correct." "Going forward," he said, We'll implement location-based prompt indicators. That's a systemic fix, I replied. But it doesn't address intent. He didn't disagree. At 12:15 p.m., I returned to my desk for the first time since the incident. My nameplate was still there. My inbox contained 12 emails from colleagues asking if the resignation was real. I responded to each with the same sentence. An unauthorized system submission was processed and has been voided. I remain in role. I avoided elaboration. At 2 p.m., Gregory called me in again. HR Legal is recommending termination for Melissa, he said. For cause? I asked. Yes. Based on what? I pressed. Unauthorized system access, falsification of employment records, and potential retaliation. Potential. He held my gaze. They are being careful with wording. I nodded. Is law enforcement involved? Corporate security filed an incident report. External referral is under review. I considered that for a moment. If you don't refer externally, you're setting precedent that someone can attempt forced resignation internally without legal consequence. He didn't argue. Do you feel safe continuing in your role? He asked. Yes, I said. But I want formal documentation that any future status change requires direct verbal confirmation. That can be arranged. By late afternoon, word had spread. 2 colleagues from finance stopped by my desk. Are you okay? One asked. Yes. Do you think it was about the audit? The other asked. Yes. They exchanged a look. Be careful, the first one said quietly. Shared services has friends. I didn't respond to that. I don't deal in rumors. I deal in records. At 4:40 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. You're making this worse than it needs to be. I forwarded it again to legal. At 5:15 p.m., Daniel Ruiz emailed me confirming that Melissa Trent had been placed on administrative leave pending termination, and that the matter had been escalated to corporate ethics and compliance. The next day, corporate ethics scheduled a formal interview with me and 3 other employees who had been present during the 3:42 p.m. meeting. Each confirmed I had been actively presenting when the authentication prompt would have occurred. The recorded meeting file was preserved as evidence. By Friday, IT completed a deeper forensic review. They determined the resignation form required navigation through employee profile search, status change workflow, voluntary resignation selection, notice period confirmation, final acknowledgement checkbox. The sequence took 19 seconds in the video. 19 seconds is not an accidental click. On Monday morning, I received written notice that Melissa Trent's employment had been terminated for cause. The letter, which I was allowed to review but not retain, cited intentional misuse of company systems and falsification of employee records. However, the investigation didn't stop there. Corporate ethics identified that Melissa had accessed 2 other employee profiles in the weeks prior. Both individuals who had raised procedural concerns in shared services. No resignation requests were submitted in those cases, but profile views were logged. When confronted, Melissa denied retaliatory intent. She claimed she was reviewing files for process alignment. The documentation contradicted her. 3 weeks after the incident, I was called into a final review meeting. Daniel Ruiz spoke first. We have concluded the internal investigation. Evidence supports that Melissa Trent intentionally submitted a resignation under your credentials, relying on your multi-factor approval, with awareness of your recent audit submission. And the text messages? I asked. The number was linked to a prepaid device purchased 2 days before the incident. Location data places it within 1 mile of her residence. I didn't react outwardly. Law enforcement has opened a formal case, Daniel continued. We've provided system logs, video footage, and communications. Carla added, your employment record has been fully restored. We have implemented additional safeguards on status change workflows. What safeguards? I asked. Dual verification for voluntary resignation requests, direct manager confirmation required, and multi-factor prompts now display the action type before approval. That's appropriate, I said. Daniel looked at me. Natalie, do you intend to pursue any civil claim? I considered the question. My objective was correction and accountability, I said. If criminal proceedings move forward, I will cooperate. He nodded. 2 months later, I was notified that Melissa had been formally charged with unauthorized computer access and attempted employment fraud under state statutes governing digital identity misuse. The charge did not use dramatic language. It described exactly what happened: accessing a protected system, submitting a falsified employment status change, and attempting to cause termination without authorization. She eventually accepted a plea agreement that included probation, restitution for investigative costs, and permanent ineligibility for employment in regulated HR functions within the state. I never spoke to her directly after the incident. The audit memo I submitted was validated independently. The bonus discrepancies were corrected. Shared services underwent procedural restructuring. I remained in my role. The only lasting change for me personally was behavioral. I no longer approve authentication prompts without reading the action description. I do not assume benign intent in internal systems. And I document everything. I took one ordinary day off work. HR said I had resigned through an official request. What actually happened was that someone tried to erase my employment using my own credentials and a 20-second window. The record now reflects the truth. And my employment file contains a final entry added by legal. Resignation submission voided. Unauthorized access confirmed. Employee retained in good standing. 3 months after Melissa's termination, I assumed the situation had stabilized. I was wrong. Started with payroll. On a Thursday morning, my direct deposit didn't hit my account. Payday is consistent in our company. Funds are deposited at 6 a.m. I checked at 6:12. Nothing. I waited until 7 o'clock. Still nothing. I logged into the payroll portal. My banking information had been changed. The primary deposit account listed was not mine. It was an unfamiliar checking account ending in 8842. Entered the previous afternoon at 4:17 p.m. I was at my desk at 4:17 p.m. the day before. I immediately checked the change history log. Unlike the resignation workflow, payroll modifications required password re-entry, but did not trigger multi-factor authentication. The system recorded that the change was made from within the company network. I took screenshots and walked straight to payroll services. The manager, Elaine Harper, pulled up my file while I stood across from her desk. I didn't change my banking information, I said. She frowned. The system shows it was updated yesterday. From where? I asked. She pulled the workstation data. Terminal 2A09. Second floor, administrative services. Who sits there? It's a rotating desk, she said. Mostly used by benefits processing. Pull the camera footage, I said calmly. She looked at me for a moment. Natalie, are you saying this is related to the previous incident? I'm saying my direct deposit information was changed without my authorization inside this building. She nodded slowly and called security. While waiting, I checked my email for any confirmation notices. There was one sent at 4:17 p.m. titled, Direct Deposit Update Confirmation. I hadn't seen it because it had been moved automatically into my archive folder. Not deleted. Archived. I don't use automatic archive rules for payroll notifications. I opened the message header. It had been accessed at 4:19 p.m. from within the internal mail client before being archived. Someone accessed my mailbox, I said. Elaine's expression changed. IT needs to be involved. Within 20 minutes, Victor from IT and Daniel from security were reviewing logs again. The camera footage from 2A09 showed a man I did not immediately recognize sitting at the workstation at 4:15 p.m. He wore a gray jacket and a visitor badge. Security zoomed in on the badge. The visitor badge was issued to consultant, temporary access. Who authorized that? I asked. Daniel checked his system. Visitor registered under HR legal appointment. I looked at him. With whom? He scrolled. Sponsor listed as Daniel Ruiz. Corporate legal. I felt something tighten in my chest. Daniel Ruiz was the same attorney who handled the internal investigation into Melissa. Call him, I said. Daniel Cho dialed legal from the security office line. Daniel Ruiz answered. There's a visitor badge issued yesterday under your sponsorship, security said. Consultant access. Do you recall? Ruiz posed. No. I had no external meetings yesterday. Your name is on the log, Daniel replied. Another pause. Send me the details. Within 10 minutes, Ruiz arrived in person. He reviewed the visitor log. The consultant entry listed the name Mark Ellison, Systems Review. I did not authorize this, Ruiz said evenly. Your credentials were used, Daniel replied. Ruiz looked at me. Natalie, this may be connected. Someone impersonated legal to gain access, I said. Victor spoke next. The payroll change required your employee profile access. The visitor would need internal login credentials. Or access to an unlocked session, I replied. Victor shook his head. The session at 2A09 required login at 4:14 p.m. Under whose credentials? I asked. He checked the log. His face tightened slightly. Under HR Legal Shared Service account. Ruiz exhaled slowly. That account should not be used for payroll. It was used to access your profile and update direct deposit fields, Victor confirmed. And then your email was accessed from the same session, he added. So someone gained entry to the building using a falsified visitor authorization under legal's name. I summarized. Logged into a shared legal services account. Changed my direct deposit. Accessed my mailbox to hide the confirmation email, and left. Silence. Elaine spoke quietly. The payroll batch hasn't been finalized yet. We can reverse the deposit before it transmits. Do it, I said. She began the reversal process immediately. Security rewound the footage. The visitor, Mark Ellison, if that was even his name, entered the building at 3:58 p.m. He was escorted through the first gate by a front desk associate after showing a printed email confirmation of his appointment. The printed confirmation bore Daniel Ruiz's email signature. Ruiz looked at it on screen. That's not my writing style. Was the email spoofed? I asked. Victor nodded. Likely. We'll need to analyze headers. I stayed quiet while they worked. The pattern was clear. First, my employment status. Now my payroll. The methods were evolving. At 5:30 p.m., IT completed preliminary email header analysis. The appointment confirmation email sent to the front desk had originated from an external domain designed to resemble our internal legal domain. One letter difference in spelling. The receptionist had not noticed. The visitor badge was issued based on that email. Is there footage of him leaving? I asked. Daniel scrubbed the timeline. Yes. At 4:28 p.m., the same man exited through the main lobby doors. Zoom in on his face, I said. The image sharpened slightly. Mid-30s, short dark hair, no facial hair, neutral expression. Run facial recognition against Melissa's known associates, I said without emotion. Ruiz looked at me. That's a serious request. So is falsifying visitor authorization to access payroll, I replied. Corporate security agreed to forward the image to law enforcement. Given the open case related to the prior incident. The next morning, Detective Owen Mercer called me. We received footage from your company, he said. The individual matches a known associate of Melissa Trent, former roommate, has minor prior charges for identity-related offenses. I closed my eyes briefly, then reopened them. Was he acting independently? We don't know yet, Mercer said. But the pattern suggests coordination. The payroll account, can you trace it? I asked. It's a newly opened account under a shell identity. We're freezing it. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. By the end of that week, additional security measures were implemented company-wide. Visitor confirmations required verbal verification from the sponsor before badge issuance. Shared service accounts were eliminated. Individual credentials became mandatory. Payroll changes triggered mandatory dual authentication and SMS confirmation. The attempted payroll diversion never completed. Funds were reversed before transmission. Melissa's legal situation escalated. The new evidence suggested ongoing coordination after termination. I was asked again whether I felt safe. I do, I said. But safety isn't the point. What is the point? Mercer asked during a follow-up call. The point is that someone believed removing me from payroll would be easier than confronting audit findings. He was silent for a moment. That's consistent with retaliatory patterns. I'm not resigning, I said clearly. I didn't think you would, he replied. 2 weeks later, arrests were made. Melissa was charged with additional counts related to conspiracy to commit financial fraud and unauthorized access facilitation. The former roommate was charged with attempted payroll diversion and impersonation. In the official complaint, the payroll attempt was described as an effort to redirect earned wages through deceptive internal access. The phrase was clinical. It did not describe the experience of checking your bank account and realizing someone inside your own workplace tried to reroute your income. It did not describe standing at a security gate while your badge failed. It did not describe approving a routine authentication prompt and discovering someone used it to attempt to erase your job. But documentation doesn't capture emotion. It captures sequence. And the sequence was now undeniable. I took 1 day off work. HR said I had resigned through an official request. When that failed, someone tried to ensure I wouldn't get paid. Both attempts were stopped because I reviewed logs immediately, preserved records, and refused to treat system anomalies as mistakes. The systems were corrected. The people responsible were charged. And my employment status remained exactly what it had always been: active. By the time the payroll diversion attempt was formally added to the criminal case, I had started keeping a parallel file at home. Not because I distrusted corporate legal entirely, but because I had learned something very specific: internal investigations focus on policy violations. Criminal investigations focus on statutes. Neither necessarily centers the employee whose name is on the paperwork. So I kept my own record. Every email, every log, every timestamp, every visitor batch number, printed and scanned, stored in a binder and backed up digitally. 2 weeks after the arrests, I received a certified letter at my home address. That detail matters. The envelope was addressed correctly, full legal name, correct street number, but the apartment unit line was wrong by 1 digit. If delivered as written, it would have gone to a neighbor. Fortunately, our building manager recognizes residence and placed it in my mailbox anyway. The return address listed a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notice of intent to pursue wrongful termination and defamation claims against the company, specifically naming me as a reporting witness whose statements had damaged the professional reputation of Melissa Trent. I read it twice. It alleged that I had falsely characterized a procedural error as malicious misconduct. It demanded preservation of all communications related to the internal audit memo. I forwarded the letter to Daniel Ruiz within 5 minutes. He called me 20 minutes later. "This is a defensive filing," he said. "Her counsel is attempting leverage." "On what basis?" I asked. "They're suggesting the resignation submission was accidental, and that your audit memo created a hostile work environment." "That's not supported by evidence," I said. "It isn't," he agreed. "But they may attempt civil discovery." I sat down at my kitchen table, the same place I'd read the resignation email weeks earlier. "They're trying to reframe the narrative," I said. "Yes," Ruiz replied. "Which is why documentation matters." "I have everything," I said. "I know you do," he replied. 3 days later, corporate counsel informed me that the company would be filing a motion to dismiss any civil claims on the grounds of documented intentional misconduct supported by system logs and video evidence. Melissa's attorney formally requested my deposition. I agreed. The deposition took place in a neutral conference room downtown. Present were Melissa's attorney, a court reporter, corporate counsel, and me. The attorney began predictably. "Ms. Mercer, you submitted an audit memo concerning shared services, correct?" "Yes." "You did not inform Ms. Trent prior to escalating your concerns?" "I requested documentation from her. I did not disclose escalation." "Would you characterize your relationship with Ms. Trent as positive?" "Professional," I replied. He attempted to imply that my audit had targeted her specifically. "It documented procedural discrepancies," I said. "It did not name individuals beyond role attribution." Then he shifted. "On the day in question, you approved a multi-factor authentication request, correct?" "Yes." "Without verifying its origin?" "Yes." "So is it possible that Ms. Trent believed she was processing a legitimate workflow that you had initiated?" "No," I said. "Why not?" Because the workflow required manual navigation through resignation confirmation screens and printing of acknowledgement forms. The video footage shows her typing independently before I approved authentication. The sequence demonstrates intent. He paused. "You're not a forensic analyst," he said. "No." Y replica calmly. "But your client's plea agreement acknowledges intentional system misuse." The room went quiet. The deposition concluded without further drama. Outside the building, I stood for a moment before walking to my car. I wasn't shaken. I was precise. The following month, the civil threat was withdrawn. Melissa accepted a revised plea agreement that included restitution to the company for investigative costs and a prohibition from accessing enterprise HR systems for 5 years. Her associate accepted probation and mandatory fraud prevention coursework. The case did not make headlines. It was processed through the standard channels. Inside the company, structural changes continued. All employment status changes now required. Dual-factor authentication clearly labeled with the action type. Manager confirmation via independent login. Automated voice verification call for immediate effect resignations. 30-minute cooling period before termination codes propagated to payroll and batch systems. I was invited to participate in the internal review committee that redesigned these safeguards. I accepted, not because I wanted influence, but because I understood the vulnerability firsthand. During one committee meeting, the Chief Information Security Officer asked, "Natalie, what was the critical failure point from your perspective?" "Assumption," I said. "Explain." "Everyone assumed internal access equaled authorized action. The system trusted location over intent. And I trusted routine prompts without scrutiny." He nodded. "We implemented a new rule. No status change workflow could be completed without explicit action labeling on the authentication prompt: resignation submission, payroll update, benefits termination." The change seems small. It is not. 6 months after the initial incident, I took another day off work. This time intentionally. I logged into the portal before leaving and verified my employment status manually. Active. I approved one authentication prompt that morning. It read clearly, "Expense report submission approve?" I approved it. Nothing else happened. When I returned the following day, my batch worked. My payroll remained intact. My personnel file was unchanged. Normalcy had been restored, not by trust but by layered verification. One evening, Gregory stopped by my desk before leaving. "You handled this differently than most would have," he said. "How so?" I asked. "Many people would have resigned for real." I considered that. "If I had resigned," I said, "the system would have validated the original misconduct." He nodded once. "You forced correction." "I forced documentation," I replied. "There's a difference." A year later, during annual compliance training, my case was anonymized and used as an internal study example. The slide read, "Case study, unauthorized employment status change, lessons in multi-factor verification." No names, no departments, just the sequence. I watched from the back of the training room while employees reviewed the scenario. When the facilitator asked, "What could have prevented this?" hands went up. Clearer authentication prompts. Manager verification. Restricted shared workstations. All correct. No one suggested that the employee should have left quietly. That part was never on the slide. I took a day off work. HR said I'd resigned through an official request. Someone used my credentials and routine behavior to try to remove me from payroll and silence an audit trail. The system failed twice. It was corrected because I documented immediately, escalated formally, and refused informal resolution. I am still employed. My personnel record reflects uninterrupted service. And every time I receive an authentication prompt now, I read it completely before I approve it. Not because I'm paranoid. Because I understand exactly how much damage can be done in 20 seconds if you don't. About 14 months after the original resignation incident, I received something I hadn't expected. A promotion. It wasn't framed as a reward for what had happened. It was positioned as a structural change. Risk compliance was being separated from operations entirely. reporting directly to the chief risk officer instead of through cross-functional oversight. Gregory called me into his office late on a Tuesday. "We're creating a senior controls oversight role," he said. "It would include authority over system change approvals tied to employment status, payroll workflows, and HR process design." I understood what that meant. Independent review authority? I asked. Yes. Direct reporting line to risk? Yes. I held his gaze for a moment. "Is this because of what happened?" I asked. "Or because of the audit findings?" He didn't hesitate. "Both." I accepted. The formal announcement went out 2 weeks later. It was neutral in tone. It did not mention prior incidents. It described expanded controls, compliance alignment, and procedural integrity. Internally, though, people understood. On my first day in the new role, I requested full documentation of every employment status change processed in the past 18 months. Not just resignations. All status changes. Voluntary resignations. Terminations for cause. Performance-based exits. Immediate effects separations. There were 312 entries. I reviewed every one. Not because I suspected another targeted attempt, but because pattern recognition matters in controls work. Of the 312, 2 additional cases showed anomalies in authentication timing, both involving supervisors approving status changes within seconds of prompts during active meetings. Neither resulted in improper termination, but both highlighted behavioral risk. We implemented an additional safeguard. Authentication prompts now required re-entry of a 4-digit dynamic code, displayed only after reading the action description for 3 seconds. Some employees complained it slowed them down. I did not remove it. Around that time, Detective Mercer contacted me for the final time regarding the criminal case. "The probation conditions have been entered," he said. "No further court appearances required from you." "Understood," I replied. "Your documentation helped," he added. "That was the goal," I said. After we hung up, I closed the file folder I'd kept at home. I didn't throw it away. I archived it. 6 months later, something else happened, smaller in scale but instructive. An employee in finance reported that his vacation payout calculation was incorrect after a system transition. Under the old process, that might have been routed to payroll and resolved quietly. Under the new structure, it came to risk. We reviewed the log. The error originated from a manual override entered under a shared account that had been scheduled for deactivation, but remained active during system migration. The override was not malicious. It was procedural sloppiness. We corrected it and formally eliminated the remaining shared accounts. If the resignation incident had not occurred, that vulnerability might have persisted. One afternoon, while reviewing status change logs, I noticed something else. There had been 0 immediate effect resignations in the last quarter. Previously, there had been an average of 5 per quarter. I brought this to the HR director. "Are we seeing behavioral change?" I asked, "or are people hesitating because of additional controls?" She reviewed the data. Exit interviews indicate employees feel more secure knowing resignations can't be processed without direct confirmation, she said. "That's measurable trust," I replied. Controls are often described as restrictive. In practice, they can increase stability. About 2 years after the day I received that first email, I ran into Carla in the lobby. She stopped me. "I still think about that morning," she said. "So do I replied. "I replay it," she continued. "How easily it could have gone unnoticed if you hadn't checked immediately." I nodded. If I'd been traveling or ignored the email until end of week, payroll would have terminated, badge deactivated, benefits canceled. And the system would have shown voluntary resignation, she said quietly. "Yes." She paused. "I'm sorry we processed it so quickly." "You followed the workflow as designed," I said. "The workflow was flawed." She exhaled slowly. "It isn't anymore." "No," I said. "It isn't." Later that week, during a cross-department meeting, someone jokingly said, "Natalie reads every authentication prompt now like it's a legal contract." I didn't laugh. "I do," I said. The room went quiet for a second. Then someone else said, "We all should." That was the actual shift. Not fear. Awareness. Last quarter, an internal audit from external consultants reviewed our employment systems. Their report included a line that stood out. Controls surrounding employment status changes exceed industry standard and demonstrate layered verification practices uncommon in similarly sized organizations. I saved that sentence. Not because it was flattering, because it was measurable evidence that the failure had been addressed structurally. On the anniversary of the incident, I did something small and personal. I logged into the employee portal. I navigated to employment status. It read, active full-time. Service date, uninterrupted. There was no visible trace of the attempted resignation. But in the audit trail archive, accessible only to risk and legal, there remains a flagged entry. 15 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds, voluntary resignation submission, voided, unauthorized. It will never be deleted. It is preserved as part of system history. Sometimes, when new managers go through compliance orientation, I am asked to speak briefly about why controls matter. I don't dramatize it. I don't mention names. I say this. Systems don't determine truth. Logs do. And logs only protect you if you review them in real time. Then I explain how a 20-second workflow, combined with a routine authentication approval, can alter employment records, payroll status, benefits eligibility, and professional history. I explain how silence benefits the person initiating the action, not the person affected by it. And I explain that escalation is not aggression, it is documentation. I took a single day off work. HR said I'd resign through an official request. That record was wrong. It was corrected because I treated the anomaly as a fact to verify, not an inconvenience to ignore. My employment continues. My payroll deposits on schedule. My badge activates at the gate without hesitation. And every status change workflow in this company now requires explicit, deliberate confirmation because one day, someone assumed they could remove me quietly. They were incorrect. About 3 years after the original incident, the company migrated to a new enterprise platform that consolidated HR, payroll, and access management into a single environment. It was marketed internally as a modernization initiative, streamlined dashboards, unified authentication, reduced administrative overhead. From a controls perspective, consolidation increases efficiency and risk simultaneously. I was assigned to the governance review team before launch. The vendor's implementation consultants presented the workflow diagrams on a large screen in conference room B. Status changes flowed into payroll automatically. Payroll flowed into badge access. Badge access synced with facilities. It's seamless, one consultant said. I looked at the diagram. Where is the interruption point? I asked. He paused. I'm sorry. The interruption point, I repeated. If a resignation is submitted fraudulently, what mechanism pauses downstream effects before payroll and access sync? He clicked through slides. The system assumes authenticated initiation. That assumption failed here before, I said evenly. The room grew quiet. To their credit, the consultants didn't dismiss the concern. They added a configurable delay buffer, 30 minutes before propagation, with automated alerting to risk if the action originated outside standard behavioral patterns. We defined behavioral patterns precisely. A resignation submitted outside business hours. A status change is initiated from shared terminals. Authentication approvals within 5 seconds of prompt receipt. A simultaneous access to email and employment records from the same session. If triggered, the system would freeze downstream actions until manual review. During user acceptance testing, I deliberately attempted to replicate the original vulnerability. I initiated a test resignation request under my own sandbox account and approved the authentication immediately. The system flagged it. Rapid authentication response inconsistent with historical pattern. The alert read. It held the resignation in pending state. That was the correct outcome. We also introduced mandatory on-screen confirmation text that required retyping a specific phrase. I confirm I am voluntarily resigning my employment effective immediately. Without typing the sentence exactly, the workflow would not proceed. Some executives complained the language was excessive. I didn't change it. After Go Live, I monitored the first 90 days of status change activity personally. 0 anomalies. On day 91, there was one. A mid-level manager attempted to process an immediate resignation for an employee who had provided verbal notice, but had not submitted formal documentation. The system halted the action. Reason: employee confirmation missing. HR contacted the employee directly. He confirmed he intended to resign, but effective 2 weeks later. Without the control, his termination would have processed instantly. That incident never escalated into conflict because the system required dual confirmation. It was precisely the kind of quiet correction controls are designed to create. Around that time, I was asked to speak at an internal leadership forum about operational resilience. I agreed on the condition that I could present actual system logs, redacted but real. On stage, I displayed a timeline from the day I had taken off work years earlier. 803 authentication prompt approved. 804 voluntary resignation submitted. 807 employment status updated. 810 payroll flagged for termination. 811 batch access scheduled for deactivation. 4 minutes. That's the total time between approval and systemic removal, I said to the room. 4 minutes. Then I showed the revised system timeline from our test simulation. 803 authentication prompt approved. 804 resignation initiated. 804 behavioral alert triggered. 804 downstream action suspended. 805 risk notification sent. That's the difference layered verification makes, I said. After the session, a senior executive approached me. I had no idea it could happen that quickly, he said. Most people don't, I replied. He nodded slowly. We budget for cybersecurity against external threats. We don't always anticipate internal workflow misuse. Both require the same principle, I said. Explicit confirmation. Not long after, I received a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize. The profile had minimal information and no mutual connections. The message read, "I know what you did to her. Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to corporate security and documented it in my file. Security traced the account. It was newly created and deactivated within 48 hours. IP address matched a public library terminal across town. There was no follow-up. It didn't change anything operationally, but it reinforced something personal. Consequences do not always conclude cleanly. A few months later, during annual review season, Gregory, now Chief Risk Officer, sat across from me in his office. "You fundamentally changed how this company treats employment records," he said. I changed the response. I corrected. The vulnerability already existed. He studied me for a moment. "Do you ever regret not just resigning that day and walking away?" he asked. "No," I said immediately. "Why?" "Because the record would have been inaccurate. And inaccuracies in employment records follow you." He nodded once. "Fair." That answer had nothing to do with loyalty to the company. It had to do with documentation. Employment history is not abstract. It affects future roles, background checks, benefits continuity, even professional licensing in some industries. Allowing a false resignation to stand would have created a permanent data point I didn't authorize. That was unacceptable. For years after the incident, I rarely think about the initial shock of seeing that email. What remains is procedural clarity. When new hires join Risk, I walk them through a single exercise on their first week. I show them an anonymized screenshot of an authentication prompt. I ask, "What would you do?" Most say, "Approve it." Then I reveal the hidden action description beneath the truncated preview. It reads, "Immediate employment termination, confirm." There is always a pause. That pause, I tell them, is control. I still take days off work. I still travel. I still approve legitimate authentication requests daily. The difference is awareness, not anxiety. Systems are tools. They execute what they are told without judgment. That day, years ago, the system was told I had resigned. It executed accordingly. Now, it asks more questions before it acts. And so do I. 5 years after the morning my badge failed at the security gate, the company underwent its first full regulatory review under expanded industry oversight rules. The review wasn't triggered by our incident. It was part of a sector-wide compliance initiative affecting firms handling sensitive financial data. Still, employment system integrity was included in scope. External regulators requested documentation for all employment status changes over the past 24 months, authentication control design specifications, incident response records tied to HR system misuse, evidence of employee notification safeguards. Because of the work we had done, those materials already existed in structured form. During the on-site review, 2 examiners sat with me in a glass-walled conference room. They were methodical, not adversarial. "Walk us through a worst-case scenario," one said. "If a fraudulent resignation were attempted today, what would occur?" I outlined the sequence precisely. Step 1. Initiation triggers contextual behavioral analysis. Step 2. Mandatory typed confirmation phrase. Step 3. Dual authentication with labeled action description. Step 4. 30-minute propagation delay. Step 5. Automated alert to risk if pattern deviation detected. Step 6. Manual verification call to the employee before payroll code changes finalize. They took notes. "Has this control stack been tested against insider threat scenarios?" the second examiner asked. "Yes," I said. "Quarterly simulation exercises. We attempt controlled misuse under supervision." "Any successful breaches?" "No." They requested the historical incident file that had prompted the redesign. Corporate legal provided a redacted version. My name was included only where necessary. One examiner looked up from the pages. "This is unusually comprehensive documentation from the affected employee," she said. "I kept contemporaneous records," I replied. "That likely preserved evidentiary clarity," she noted. "It preserved sequence," I corrected. At the end of the review cycle, the regulatory report included a finding. Employment status governance demonstrates proactive remediation and layered safeguards exceeding baseline compliance expectations. That language mattered to leadership. To me, it confirmed something else. Documentation outlives disruption. Around that same time, I received an unexpected email from someone outside the company, an HR director at a mid-sized firm in another state. She wrote that she had attended a virtual industry conference where I'd spoken about authentication controls. Her company had experienced a payroll diversion attempt through manipulated resignation workflows. "Your presentation helped us recognize the pattern quickly," she wrote. I responded with high-level guidance, nothing proprietary. Control design principles are not secrets. Later that year, I was invited to contribute to an industry working group focused on internal system integrity. The sessions were technical, granular, and collaborative. We shared anonymized case studies. In one meeting, a participant described a scenario eerily similar to mine: authentication fatigue exploited during routine approvals. After the session, she messaged me privately. "Did this happen to you personally?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "How did you not leave?" she asked. I considered the question before answering. "Because the record was wrong," I wrote. "And I correct inaccurate records." That is still the simplest explanation. Not loyalty. Not resilience narratives. Accuracy. 6 years after the initial event, my role expanded again. I now oversee enterprise data integrity across multiple business lines. Employment records were the starting point, but the principle applies everywhere. Data that defines status must require deliberate confirmation. Recently, during a system audit, we discovered a minor discrepancy in benefits eligibility coding affecting 3 employees due to a legacy integration script. It was corrected within hours. What mattered was not the scale of the error, but the detection speed. When you build systems that question themselves, anomalies surface faster. Occasionally, new employees learn through informal channels that I was once almost terminated by the system. The phrasing is inaccurate, but I understand it. If asked directly, I state the facts. I was never terminated. A resignation was submitted without authorization. It was voided the same morning. Precision matters. Last month, I visited the security desk where, years ago, my badge had flashed red. The hardware has since been replaced. The software updated. The guards rotated. I tapped my current badge. Green light. Access granted. The guard nodded automatically, unaware of the history embedded in that simple approval. That's appropriate. Systems should function without drama. I no longer keep the physical binder at home on my kitchen table. It's stored in a labeled archive box in a filing cabinet. Not because I expect another attempt, but because maintaining records is a practice, not a reaction. When I take a day off now, I don't log in to verify my status beforehand. I don't need to. The controls are structural, not personal. Every authentication prompt I receive, expense approvals, system access renewals, vendor contracts, I read the action description fully before responding. Not out of fear. Out of discipline. Years ago, someone assumed that routine behavior would allow a false record to become permanent. They relied on speed and silence. Speed was interrupted. Silence was replaced with documentation. I remained employed. The record remained accurate. And the system that once accepted a fraudulent resignation in 4 minutes now requires layered confirmation that makes such misuse functionally impossible without detection. That is not a dramatic ending. It is a procedural one, which, in governance work, is the only kind that matters. 7 years after the day I took off work and was told I had resigned, I was asked a question I hadn't heard before. It came from a new analyst on my team during her onboarding week. We were reviewing historical control failures across different industries, aviation checklists, medical dosing systems, financial reconciliation errors. She looked up from her laptop. "Why didn't anyone call you before processing the resignation?" she asked. It was such a direct question that I paused before answering. "Because the workflow didn't require it," I said. She frowned slightly. "But wouldn't that be common sense?" "Common sense is not a control," I replied. "Design is." She nodded slowly. That distinction has become central to how I think about governance. People assume verification will happen because it feels obvious. Systems only do what they are configured to do. The original configuration allowed a resignation to process based on authenticated initiation alone. There was no mandatory human confirmation step beyond the authentication prompt itself. And I had approved that prompt without reading the action description. That fact remains part of the sequence. It's important not to revise your own role in hindsight. Last year, during an internal ethics workshop, a facilitator presented a hypothetical scenario. You receive an unexpected system notification while multitasking. Approve or decline? Most participants said they would approve and review later. I asked the facilitator if I could add context. She agreed. I described, without naming dates or individuals, how a single approval can cascade across employment status, payroll eligibility, healthcare coverage, retirement contributions, and physical access credentials. You don't review later, I said to the group. Later may not exist in the system state you recognize. There was silence after that. Not dramatic silence, reflective silence. After the session, the facilitator approached me. "Would you be comfortable if we formalize that example in training materials?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "As long as it remains about process, not personality." She smiled. Agreed. Around the same time, I encountered an unexpected reminder that the impact of inaccurate employment records extends beyond payroll. A former colleague, someone who had left the company years earlier, contacted me privately. He had discovered during a background check for a new role that his departure from a previous employer was coded incorrectly as termination instead of voluntary resignation. It was a clerical error, but it delayed his hiring process by weeks. He asked if I had advice. "Request the original status change log," I told him. "Not the summary code. The log." He followed up 2 weeks later. The log showed that the termination code had been entered before his formal resignation paperwork was uploaded, then never corrected. Once documented, the employer amended the record. The correction resolved the issue. That conversation reinforced why I stayed years ago. Employment data persists. It moves across systems, insurers, background check vendors, benefits administrators. An incorrect entry is not just a momentary inconvenience. It can follow you. Earlier this year, the board requested a briefing on human factor vulnerabilities in automated systems. I prepared a report that included a section titled Authentication Fatigue and Routine Approval Risk. The first slide contained only 4 timestamps: 803, 804, 8:07, 8:11. Then I explained what had occurred within those minutes years earlier. A board member asked, "What would have happened if you hadn't checked your email that morning?" "Payroll would have terminated by end of cycle," I said. "Benefits cancellation notices would have generated automatically. Badge access would have deactivated by noon. The record would reflect voluntary resignation unless contested." "And if you were unreachable?" "The correction window narrows," I said. "But logs still exist. Documentation is recoverable. Delay increases complexity." He leaned back slightly. "So vigilance at the individual level matters as much as system design." "Yes," I said. "But systems must not rely solely on vigilance." That balance, human awareness plus structural safeguards, is what changed after the incident. Not just here. In conversations across companies. In industry working groups. In quiet policy revisions no one outside governance teams notices. Last month, I reviewed our annual employment status audit. 0 unauthorized changes. 0 immediate effect resignations without dual confirmation. 0 payroll diversions. 7 years. That number is not symbolic. It is measurable. Occasionally someone will still ask me, "Do you trust the system now?" I answer carefully. "I trust the controls." I say, trusting a system blindly is how the original vulnerability existed. Trusting layered verification is different. I don't revisit the morning at the security gate often anymore. But sometimes, when I'm walking through the lobby and hear the soft click of badge readers activating, I think about how quiet systemic errors can be. No alarms. No dramatic alerts. Just a line in a database changing from active to resigned. That line determines salary continuation, insurance eligibility, building access, professional history. It is small in appearance and enormous in consequence. 7 years ago, someone attempted to change that line without my authorization. They relied on procedural speed and routine behavior. What stopped it was not emotion. It was immediate documentation, formal escalation, and refusal to accept an inaccurate record. I still work here. My employment history remains uninterrupted. And every employment status workflow in this organization now requires explicit, redundant confirmation, because once for 4 minutes, it did not. That is the entire reason this story matters. Not because it was dramatic, because it was preventable. And now it is. 8 years after the morning my employment status changed without my authorization, I reviewed something I had never seen before. The archived system code from the legacy HR platform. We were preparing for a data retention review tied to long-term storage policies. As part of that process, engineering extracted historical workflow configurations for documentation before permanent archival. I asked to see the resignation module logic as it had existed on the day of the incident. The developer assigned to the task projected the code structure onto a screen in a small meeting room. It was stripped of formatting, plain logic blocks and conditional statements. There it was. If authentication token equals valid and user role equals authorized, then update employment underscore status equals resigned. Trigger payroll underscore flag equals terminate. Q badge underscore deactivation. No confirmation string requirement. No behavioral anomaly detection. No propagation delay. For lines had altered my employment record. Looking at it years later, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. "That's it?" the developer asked, almost apologetically. "That was sufficient at the time," I said. "By today's standards, it's minimal," he added. "By today's standards," I agreed. Controls evolve because failures reveal assumptions. We archived the code with annotations explaining why the logic had been expanded in later iterations. Documentation now included a plain language note. Original configuration relied solely on valid authentication token. Subsequent redesign incorporated contextual validation and dual confirmation following unauthorized workflow misuse event. That sentence will remain attached to the codebase history indefinitely. Not as a warning, as an explanation. Around the same time, I was contacted by a graduate student researching organizational responses to internal system misuse. She had read one of my industry articles on layered verification. Did the experience change how you view your employer? She asked during our call. It changed how I view systems, I said. And the people involved? She pressed. I view them as participants in a flawed design, I replied. Some exploited it. Others trusted it. She was quiet for a moment. Would you say you forgave them? She asked. I corrected the record, I said. Forgiveness isn't a governance framework. That answer may sound detached. It isn't. It's precise. Years ago, I could have framed what happened as personal betrayal. Instead, I treated it as procedural failure. That framing allowed for structural change instead of private resentment. This year, during our annual employee survey, one of the highest-rated statements was, I feel confident that employment and payroll records accurately reflect my status. That metric did not exist before the incident. It exists now because leadership realized that confidence in data is foundational to trust in the organization. Recently, I took another day off work. Not for travel. Not for crisis. Just a regular personal day. I did not log in beforehand. I did not check my employment status mid-morning. I did not monitor my inbox for anomalies. When I returned the next day, everything functioned normally. Badge green. Email active. Payroll scheduled. That normalcy is the outcome of layered design, not luck. A few months ago, during a panel discussion on operational risk, someone in the audience asked a question that returned me to the origin point. What's the most overlooked vulnerability in enterprise systems? He asked. I answered without hesitation. Routine behavior, I said. He asked me to elaborate. When actions become habitual, scrutiny decreases, I explained. If systems rely solely on habitual approval rather than deliberate confirmation, they inherit that vulnerability. I described how a 20-second approval, made without reading the full action description, had initiated a cascade that altered payroll, benefits, and building access. And how did you stop it? He asked. By treating the anomaly as evidence, I said. Not as inconvenience. That distinction matters. Inconveniences are ignored. Evidence is documented. As part of our internal knowledge repository, we now maintain a file titled Unauthorized Employment Status Attempt, Corrective Actions. It contains timeline reconstruction, authentication log analysis, a video access review summary, payroll reversal procedure, system redesign documentation, policy amendments, a training updates. It does not contain emotional narrative. It contains sequence. 8 years ago, someone assumed I would not challenge a system-generated resignation notice. They assumed procedural authority would override individual objection. They assumed speed would discourage escalation. Every one of those assumptions failed. Not because I reacted dramatically, because I responded methodically. Today, if an unauthorized employment status change were attempted, it would trigger a behavioral alert, a dual authentication verification, a mandatory typed confirmation phrase, a propagation delay, a risk review notification, a direct verification call to the employee, multiple interruption points. The system now questions actions that once passed unquestioned. That evolution is the actual outcome of the day I took off work. Not the arrests, not the depositions, not the regulatory reviews. The redesign. Employment records determine income continuity, healthcare access, retirement contributions, and professional history. They are not administrative details. They are structural facts. I am still employed. My service date remains uninterrupted. And the database entry that once shifted from active to resigned, without my consent, now exists only as a voided log preserved in audit history. Evidence of a vulnerability corrected, not a resignation accepted. 1 day off work. For minutes of flawed logic. Years of structural change. That is the complete sequence. And subscribe so you don't miss a part 2.